Hello and welcome to the topic Acute Lymphoblastic Leukemia, or also known as ALL, in the module Hematology. By the end of this topic, you should be able to define ALL, explain the pathophysiology and risk factors associated with ALL, outline the clinical manifestations, list the investigations that are carried out, discuss the principles of management, explain the complications, and discuss the prognosis of ALL. Let's get started. ALL, or acute lymphoblastic leukemia, is a malignant clonal disease of lymphoid cells characterized by uncontrolled proliferation of immature, non-functional lymphoblasts in the bone marrow. A simple breakdown of the term, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. While we might be tempted to think the word acute here refers to the duration of leukemia, it actually refers to the degree of cell differentiation. Lymphoid, its base word lymph in Latin, lympha meaning water. Since leukemia is classified according to the predominant type of cells involved, lymphoid in this context refers to the lineage of the cell. Sir Rudolf Virchow first named the condition leukemia after observing an abnormally large number of white blood cells in a sample of blood. This word came from combining two Greek words which are leukos meaning white and haima meaning blood. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia is the most common childhood malignancy, though rare if accounting for the whole population worldwide. Approximately 75% of cases occur in children below the age of 6. According to the 2016 WHO classification of ALL, which utilizes morphological and genetic factors, ALL is firstly differentiated into B lymphoblastic leukemia not otherwise specified, B lymphoblastic leukemia with recurrent genetic abnormalities, and T lymphoblastic leukemia. The subtypes of B lymphoblastic leukemia with recurrent genetic abnormalities are differentiated based on the different genetic abnormalities that have caused the clonal expansion. B lymphoblastic leukemia with recurrent genetic abnormalities, for example, the translocation 922, and this accounts for 25% of B acute lymphoblastic leukemia and less than 5% of childhood B lymphoblastic leukemia. And the rest here are other examples of the lymphoblastic leukemia with recurrent genetic abnormalities. Moving on to the pathophysiology, somatic mutations in a lymphoid progenitor cell causes uncontrolled clonal expansion and proliferation of hematopoietic precursors. These dysfunctional blasts are incapable of differentiating into specialized cells and have impaired apoptosis pathways. What's interesting to note is that these leukemic blasts are clones of a single cell and have identical features of the lymphoid progenitor cell. Somatic mutations can be caused by genetic abnormalities such as chromosomal translocations or aneuploidy, and these are seen in 75% of cases. These translocations are recurrent and not random. Next would be molecular abnormalities, and these can be classified to the functional consequence of their oncogenic mutation. The most common cytogenic abnormality in adult ALL results from chromosomal translocation, also known as Philadelphia chromosome. Patients with Philadelphia chromosome often experience an aggressive disease, whereby we have the T315L mutation in Philadelphia chromosome positive ALL and is associated with an even more aggressive disease. An accumulation of these leukemic blasts in the bone marrow not only disrupts normal hematopoiesis, these blasts also infiltrate other organs, most commonly the liver, spleen, and lymph nodes, to disrupt physiological function. The exact cause of ALL is unknown, and in most cases, there are no identifiable risk factors. There are, however, certain factors that have been noted to contribute to the development of ALL, and these include genetic or chromosomal factors, such as in children with trisomy 21. The risk of developing ALL is 10 to 20 times higher than the general population. Environmental factors such as radiation and smoke exposure, viral infections such as infections with human T-cell lymphotropic virus or HTLV has been linked to adult T-cell leukemia or lymphoma. Next would be a history of malignancy and associated treatments, as alkylating chemotherapy and ionizing radiation can cause damage to the bone marrow. Poor maternal diet and folate metabolism polymorphisms have also been linked to the development of ALL. Age, there seems to be a peak in incidence in 3 age groups, where children less than 5 years of age, young adults in their mid to late 30s, and elder patients around their mid-80s. There are also studies to suggest that the development of ALL is multifactorial. So there's a two-step process in utero genetic mutation that generates a pre-leukemic clone, then a secondary genetic change caused by postnatal infections. Now, let's take a look at the clinical features. They are directly related to infiltration of the organs and bone marrow by the leukemic cells. Signs and symptoms of suppressed marrow activity is also typical. We have anemia, which manifests as fatigue, pallor, palpitations, and dyspnea upon exertion. Thrombocytopenia, which can present as epistaxis, bleeding gums, petechia, and purpura. Leukopenia, which puts the patient at an increased risk of catching an infection, and this brings us to the next point. Fever and painless generalized lymphadenopathy are often always the first signs of ALL. Though patients will often lack any evidence of infection, it would be wise to assume that all fevers are due to infection until proven otherwise, as failure to promptly address infections in these patients can be fatal. In patients undergoing treatment for ALL, infections remain the number one cause of death. Patients may also present with night sweats, unintentional weight loss, hepatosplenomegaly, bone pain, dyspnea, or airway obstruction, and this is due to thymic infiltration primarily seen in T-cell ALL and testicular enlargement. Features of superior vena cava syndrome are also seen in patients with ALL. There are hemodynamic symptoms being facial plethora, prominent venous pattern on the face, upper extremities and chest, jugular venous distension, orthostatic hypotension, syncope, and renal failure. Signs of neck congestion include dyspnea, cough, hoarseness of voice, stridor, and dysphagia. Neurological symptoms are headache, dizziness, confusion and mental obtundation, and visual impairment. As CNS involvement is a major complication of ALL, presenting features of CNS include focal neurological signs, papillar edema, knuckle rigidity, and meningismus. In the initial approach for a patient with suggestive clinical or lab features, the first set of investigations are a routine lab studies which include full blood count with differentials. Leukocyte levels may vary and it's not a reliable diagnostic marker as white blood cells in ALL will be immature and non-functional. Thrombocytopenia and anemia is typical in ALL, though severity may vary. Next would be a peripheral blood smear, and you'll find the presence of leukemic lymphoblasts, but this alone is not sufficient to establish a diagnosis of ALL. Liver function tests and renal tests may be abnormal secondary to the infiltrative disease, and they are necessary before starting therapy. Then we can move on to a comprehensive metabolic panel, which is often deranged due to an increased cell lysis. We have elevated uric acid, and this reflects the extent of tumor burden. Hypercalcemia caused by bony infiltration or ectopic release of parathyroid hormone-like substance. Phosphorus elevation due to ineffective leukopoiesis or chemotherapy-induced tumor lysis. Hyperkalemia as a result of extensive cell lysis. And LDH elevation due to increased cell turnover. This is an important baseline investigation. Next would be coagulation studies, which should be done as it could help identify features of disseminated intravascular coagulation. Mild coagulopathy is expected, and in patients with bleeding or petechia, levels of prothrombin time, partial thromboplastin time, fibrinogen and D-dimers should be measured. Diagnosis of ALL is made when there is at least 20% of lymphoblasts that are present in the bone marrow. This requires a bone marrow aspirate. If unable to acquire a bone marrow sample, peripheral blood may be utilized. A bone marrow trophine will assess cellularity, topography, and blast immunohistochemistry and blast immunocytochemistry for lineage markers to complement morphologic assessment. Regarding immunohistochemistry, a negative myeloperoxidase stain and a positive terminal deoxynucleotide transferase is the hallmark of ALL. Even so, the confirmation of lymphoid lineage should be done through a flow cytometric demonstration of lymphoid antigens such as CD3 and CD19 for T cell lineage and B cell lineage ALL respectively. In ALL, the predominant cell type seen in peripheral blood or bone marrow aspirates are lymphoblasts. These cells are small to intermediate sized blasts. These blasts typically have large irregular nuclei, coarse clumped nuclear chromatin, indistinct nucleoli, and scanty agranular cytoplasm. Lymphoblasts also may contain cytoplasmic vacuoles and occasionally have cytoplasmic granules that are periodic acid shift positive. As mentioned earlier, serum chemistry should be continuously monitored in follow-up as elevation of serum calcium, potassium, phosphate, uric acid, and lactic acid are indicative of disease severity and progression. There are several screening tests for extramedullary disease. All patients with ALL should undergo a screening for CNS infiltration as it is a major complication of ALL. Therefore, a lumbar puncture is indicated and a CSF flow cytometry is done. Testicular ultrasound is also done to determine if there is testicular infiltration. Cases of T-cell ALL may warrant a chest X-ray or a CT scan, as thymic infiltration may present as mediastinal mass. A multiple gated acquisition CT scan or a MUGA scan can be used to not only identify the degree of lymphadenopathy in a patient, but also gives a clearer idea of baseline cardiac function. An ECG should be performed before starting treatment, as most chemotherapeutic agents are cardiotoxic. Abdominal CT or ultrasound may reveal organ enlargement in line with hepatosplenic infiltration. And blood culture should be obtained in patients with suspected infections, regardless of their presentation with or without fever. Now, there are specialized studies that can be used to identify the cell line involved and hence tailor therapies for better outcomes. We can use immunophenotyping flow cytometry, which is mandatory for identifying leukemic clone and useful in minimal residual disease. This can also help determine whether patients are eligible for certain therapies, such as CD20 rituximab, CD22 inotuzumab. TDT itself is not specific for ALL, but help distinguish between malignancies of more mature lymphocytes, such as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. How about cytogenetic profiling and molecular studies? And these offer the strongest predictor of outcome. Adverse outcomes are highly associated with cytogenetic abnormalities, such as translocation 922, translocation 411, translocation 1814. These are complex karyotypes with 5 or more chromosomal abnormalities. The more common cytogenic abnormality in adult ALL, the Philadelphia chromosome with BCR-ABL1 fusion gene, often have aggressive disease that is resistant to standard chemotherapeutics. The deletion of 9q and high hyperdiploidy of 51 to 65 chromosomes are associated with favorable outcomes. As you can see in the chart here, we explore the management algorithm for ALL. For patients with PH positive or Philadelphia disease positive, tyrosine kinase inhibitors are used as supportive treatment as compared to patients with CD20 positive, in which rituximab would be preferred. There are 3 phases of chemotherapy. First would be the induction phase, where high doses are used to induce a massive reduction of tumor cell count. This goes on for 4 to 8 weeks. The goal here is to eradicate all detectable cancer. Standard induction therapy includes corticosteroids, cyclophosphamide, vincristine, and a choice of anthracycline. Reinduction may be necessary in cases of relapse or failure of primary induction. Next would be consolidation therapy, where medium doses are utilized to destroy any remaining tumor cells. And finally, maintenance therapy, using low-dose chemotherapy to maintain remission for 2 to 3 years. Common agents used in chemotherapy regimens for ALL include alkylating agents such as cyclophosphamide, anthracyclines such as daunorubicin and doxorubicin, antimetabolites such as cytarabine, methotrexate, and 6-mecaptopurine, enzyme therapy such as L-asparaginase, alkaloids such as vincristine, and glucocorticoids such as prednisolone and dexamethasone. A case of relapse ALL confers an extremely poor prognosis. These patients should be considered for salvage therapy. However, there is no universally accepted treatment approach for salvage therapy. Treatment would be to individualize based on the patient's profile and tolerance. The only curative approach to the treatment of relapse is allogenic stem cell transplant. However, the prerequisite for this is to achieve complete remission. Although not concomitant, extramedullary relapse is invariably associated with bone marrow relapse. In CNS relapse, the intrathecal therapy should be given until there are no more blasts detectable in the CSF. Methotrexate is contraindicated to be used as an adjunct with CNS irradiation, as it could precipitate severe encephalopathic effects. Therefore, cytarabine and steroids are appropriate choice following CNS relapse. In Philadelphia positive cases, where typically treated with a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, relapse or intolerance are then managed using another tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Now let's take a look at radiation therapy. Cranial or craniospinal irradiation is effective at treating CNS disease. However, it can lead to severe cognitive impairment and secondary malignancies. Therefore, it is reserved for cases of relapse, resistant cases, or as part of a clinical trial. As for biological therapy, allogenic stem cell transplant mentioned earlier from a sibling or a matched donor is highly preferred as an approach to patients with high risk of residual disease and relapse. Immunotherapy is used as an adjunct to standard reinduction chemotherapy regimens for treatment of relapse or refractory ALL. Of the many, these are few approved immunotherapies that are used for patients such as rituximab, inotuzumab, blinatumomab, ozogamicin. And finally, supportive treatment. So you will require vigorous hydration, which is key to prevent hyperuricemia and tumor lysis syndrome. Anti-infectives should be administered to prevent and or treat infections. Risk of infection is highest when neutropenia is most prominent and prolonged, and that is following induction chemotherapy. Granulocyte colony stimulating factor, or GCSF, or granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor, GM-CSF, should be used to prevent febrile neutropenia. Platelet transfusion should be used to prevent or treat coagulopathy, and for female patients who are of menstruating age, norethindrosterone can be used to suppress menses during severe thrombocytopenia. Mouth care is initiated to minimize oral mucositis. Leukapheresis is indicated when patients have symptoms of leukostasis. Now, let's take a look at some complications. So, tumor lysis syndrome results from rapid destruction of tumor cells leading to a massive release of intracellular components, for example, potassium, phosphate, and uric acid. Hyperuricemia can lead to acute gout, uric acid stones, urate nephropathy, and ultimately acute kidney injury. This tumor lysis syndrome is most common after initiating cytotoxic therapy in hematological malignancies, though it is also possible in patients with high tumor burden. To remember the electrolytes affected in TLS, think of puke calcium, PUKE calcium, P for phosphorus, U for uric acid, K for potassium, E for elevated, and C for calcium, which is decreased. Clinical features of tumor lysis syndrome are closely related to the extent of electrolyte imbalance and acute kidney injury. Typical features would be renal failure, which include edema, lethargy, and oliguria. Hyperkalemia could manifest cardiac arrhythmias, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Hypocalcemia may result in tetany, muscle cramps, and seizures. The mainstay of management and prophylaxis of tumor lysis syndrome remains to be aggressive hydration and fluid management. It is also important to avoid nephrotoxic drugs such as NSAIDs and added potassium due to the risk of hyperkalemia. Consider reviewing the patient's hydration status and using allopurinol. Allopurinol should be continued for the first 2 phases of induction treatment unless there are contraindications or allergies. In the case of relapse, it should be reinitiated. The 5-year survival rate for ALL is comparatively higher than of AML. However, it varies from 20 to 80%, favoring children and adolescents over elderly patients. The outcome for adult ALL is heavily age-dependent. For patients aged 15 to 54, the overall survival at 5 years is more than 50%. For 55 to 64 years of age, 5-year survival rate drops to less than 30%. And for patients older than 65 years of age, they have the worst prognosis, which is less than 20%. To summarize, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, ALL, is a malignant clonal disease where lymphoid precursor cells become mutated and proliferate uncontrollably, accumulating in the bone marrow and infiltrating other organs, ultimately disrupting normal physiology functions. Fever and lymph node enlargement are often the first signs that warrant medical attention. Most patients have clinically evident hematological abnormalities at the time of diagnosis. Definitive diagnosis is dependent on a bone marrow aspiration in which the presence of more than 20% of lymphoblasts confirms the diagnosis of ALL. Treatment utilizes multi-agent and dose-intense chemotherapy in 3 phases, which starts with induction, followed by consolidation, and ends with maintenance. Stem cell transplantation following induction chemotherapy is considered for high-risk patients. Options for relapse, refractory, and residual disease include salvage chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and stem cell transplantation. Unfortunately, despite aggressive management methods, less than 30% of adults with ALL can be cured. Younger children have a comparatively better prognosis. We have come to the end of this topic. Thank you.